Good afternoon. The September 16, 2024 meeting of the Election Compliance Audit Committee is called to order. We'll start with a few housekeeping items. I note that all members of the committee are present, so we will not call the roll. Are there any declarations of interest by the committee? Seeing none, I move to item 3, specifically 3.1, the confirmation of the minutes for the Election Compliance Audit Committee meeting of August 28th, 2024, which were circulated earlier. Are those minutes confirmed, members?
Confirmed.
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 Thank you. Before considering the substantive item on today's agenda, I'd like to clarify the committee's purpose and process today. With respect to item 4.1, the committee will be considering the report from the auditor appointed by this committee with respect to apparent contraventions of the Municipal Elections Act 1996, and will decide whether to commence a legal proceeding against the candidate for any apparent contraventions. This committee, the auditor, and the city clerk do not have any power to determine whether a contravention of the act has occurred. In that regard, a decision by this committee that legal proceedings should be commenced does not mean that a contravention has occurred. That determination is within the Court of Ontario's jurisdiction. If the committee decides to commence legal proceedings, the matter will be referred to an independent prosecutor who will retain his or her own prosecutorial discretion as to whether or not to move forward with a prosecution. With respect to the process today, this committee is not a court or a quasi-judicial tribunal. The hearing is inquisitorial, not adversarial in nature. There is no cross-examination contemplated by our rules of procedure, and there will not be any cross-examination of any participant. The committee may hear from the parties and/or representatives of the parties. Each party and the representative have a combined 10 minutes to speak. The committee's rules of procedure do not allow for a right of reply from any of the speakers and does not allow for debate between the applicant, the candidate, or the auditor. Committee members may ask questions of the speakers for the purpose of obtaining information and receiving clarification on the matter under discussion. Once all the speakers have spoken, committee members will have an opportunity to ask questions of city staff or the committee's legal counsel, as well as an opportunity to speak on the matter. The committee will then either adjourn the meeting to deliberate in private and decide the matter or render a decision immediately after all representations have been made. So turning to item 4, specifically item 4.1 in the auditor's report, the election compliance audit of the campaign finances of candidate Doug Thompson of Ward 20, Osgood, from the 2022 municipal elections. The auditor, Raymond Shabak Grant Thornton, will provide an overview of the report. We have Paul, Pierre-Charles, Shana, and Francesco here today, and so I will turn it over to them now for their presentation to the committee.
If I could quickly interject, Shana Miller is on the call. Could they confirm whether the other auditors are also in attendance in the meeting, or are they joining separately?
Oh, Ms. Miller, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
There's always one. Sorry about that. I believe Paul has joined. He had messaged me that he's having trouble joining, or was having trouble, but I believe he connected. I'm just going to message him and ask him.
Chair, if I may also request that he raise his hand so that we could try to identify him in the attendee list.
Thank you. Yes.
Paul has joined.
Okay. We'll just give a moment to identify him and bring him in.
Yes, he'll be presenting. Francesco will not be joining, but Pierre-Charles should be on as well.
Thank you. If I could ask Paul or Pierre-Charles to please raise their hands virtually so that they can be identified by Mr. Pillow.
Unfortunately, there seems to be a glitch in Zoom where a number of the attendees are not visible. If we could just have a brief recess to see if that can be fixed, Chair, that'd be appreciated.
Certainly, Mr. Committee Coordinator. We will adjourn briefly. Don't go anywhere. I hope we can be right back momentarily.
Chair, looks like the issue is resolved, so we could reconvene at your convenience.
Thank you. I take it everyone is still present. It looks like they are on my screen. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience. I'm now going to invite Paul, Pierre-Charles, and Shayna to please proceed with the presentation of the audit report.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I don't see Pierre-Charles, but I think we can. Oh, there he is.
There you go.
Perfect. Perfect. So we were engaged to perform the compliance report relating to the election campaign finances for the 2022 regular election campaign for the candidate Doug Thompson. Our procedures related to the complaints that was made in the application for the compliance audit, and also the other provisions in the act related to the campaign finances, being sections 88.8 through 88.32. Please refer to our report for full details relating to our procedures, observations, and conclusions. Now I'll go through a summary of our report and findings. So I'll start with the complaint that was made through the application for compliance audit. The complaint related to the value of the signs and other items used from previous campaigns. Based on our procedures, we found that an apparent non-compliance. The candidate's financial statements reported a value of $100 without identifying any inventory. The candidate has confirmed that he had reused the signs. The candidate also confirmed that the signs were of a higher value than what was reported in the financial statements. Also, a valuation of the signs was performed by Holly Signs, which also noted an inventory and a value that was higher than what was reported in the financial statements. Therefore, the amount recorded in the financial statements for the previous election campaign signs was inaccurate and is an apparent non-compliance of section 88.19 subsection 3 of the MEA. As mentioned, there was the complaint and then other observations related to the other sections of the Act that we performed procedures. Based on our procedures, we also identified inaccuracies in the financial statements submitted. To note, no revised financial statement was submitted by the candidate's campaign. We identified 3 inaccuracies within the financial statements. One related to bank charges. The bank charges identified in the bank statements were less than what was reported in the financial statements. Expenses related to home hardware. The total receipts from home hardware were less than what was reported in the financial statements. And lastly, donation from candidate's wife was recorded in the wrong area of the financial statements. Therefore, we have concluded that there's a non-compliance of section 88.22 subsection 1D and 88.25 subsection 3 of the MEA. The last item to note based on our observations and procedures is the missing of one receipt that was not provided during our procedures. Therefore, we have concluded that this is a non-compliance on section 88.22 subsection 1, G and H, as a candidate should have kept records of all transactions. Thank you for your time, everyone. And again, please refer to our report for additional details.
Thank you. Just to confirm, you've referenced Mr. Maniscalco, a couple of non-compliances, but for clarification, those are apparent non-compliances with the MEA.
That is correct. Thank you for clarification.
Thank you. Committee members, before we move to questions for the auditors, we will hear from the other participants, and then we will circle back and you can ask any questions you may have for Raymond Shabak, Grant Thornton, with the benefit of the other submissions that are being made. Mr. Committee Coordinator, is anyone here on behalf of the applicant?
Yes, Chair. Mr. Pappas is on the line for the applicant.
Thank you. Mr. Pappas, will promote you to speaking, and you have 10 minutes to make your submissions today, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm ready to proceed whenever you're ready to have me.
Thanks, Mr. Pello. If we are ready to go with the timer, then we are ready to proceed.
Yes, Chair, we are timing.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Pappas.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for hearing from me today. As Mr. Pillow had mentioned, I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Edward Phillips, with respect to this compliance audit application. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my client, the applicant, respectfully submits that this committee should authorize a prosecution against the candidate, Mr. Thompson, for the apparent contraventions identified in the auditor's report. Mr. Cullen, as you noted, again, at this juncture, the committee's not deciding guilt or innocence or whether Mr. Thompson actually contravened the rules, but what you're doing is exercising discretion about whether or not a prosecution is in the public interest. And my submission today, what you'll hear from me, is that the public interest would be served by commencing a prosecution against Mr. Thompson. Now, the auditors have just taken you through the report, and no doubt the members of the committee have reviewed it. But what that report demonstrates is a series of mistakes that Mr. Thompson has made in his campaign finances and indeed the campaign finance statement. What we have is principally an undervaluation of reused signs that Mr. Thompson used from his previous election campaign inventory, misreporting of bank charges, failure to report certain transactions, misclassifying certain transactions, and ultimately a failure to keep proper records. Each is a discrete apparent contravention of the Municipal Elections Act. And how or why these errors were missed when the campaign financial statement was being prepared, that's immaterial. What matters is that Mr. Thompson, as a candidate, had an obligation to make sure his financial statement was true and correct, and he had failed to uphold this duty. What these apparent contraventions reflect in my submission is a level of inattention and carelessness in complying with his duties under the Municipal Elections Act, and that is serious. Here's why I say that. To draw back on the principles that underlie the Act, the entire campaign finance regime operates on the timely and accurate public disclosure of campaign finances. The goal of this regime is to enable electors to scrutinize campaign finances because this fosters transparency and accountability in local government. And it helps ensure the electorate can have confidence that elections were open, free, and fair. But this exercise and this requisite public scrutiny, it's only as good as the reliability of the data that informs it, and that's the campaign finance statement. And that's why the Act imposes significant duties on candidates to, among other things, properly categorize and report their finances, to properly value expenses and contributions, and all underlying this is a central but very simple obligation: keep proper records. Again, the Act doesn't say that we have to keep records for the sake of keeping records, but it requires this so that there's sufficient backup when preparing a report to the public that a candidate declares is true and correct, that all of the financial materials and information reported to the public are correct. These obligations are complex and interwoven, but they go to this central purpose. And a failure to uphold these obligations in my submission shows a disregard for the campaign finance rules and a disregard for the need for electors to have confidence in the integrity of the election. And with that in mind, members of the committee, I'll turn to the circumstances of this report. Mr. Thompson is a seasoned politician. His career goes back 40 years, and importantly, he has run in several municipal elections that would be subject to this regime, the campaign finance rules, at least 5 by my count. And despite this wealth of experience, what the report demonstrates is that Mr. Thompson's finances do not bear a high level of scrutiny because they've not been prepared with the level of care expected by the Act, but also expected of the electorate. And here, the principles of both specific and general deterrence are engaged. Now, appreciating those are matters for the Ontario Court of Justice in levying a penalty, I submit that this is certainly relevant to the committee's determination today. And what's especially important here is general deterrence. It must be demonstrated to the electorate and indeed to other candidates who may wish to run that failure to uphold the most basic obligations of a candidate, record keeping and accurately reporting finances, will be met with consequences. Now, what you might hear from Mr. Thompson's counsel is that these contraventions are all minor, they're trivial, low dollar value, or that they were inadvertent mistakes and don't warrant a prosecution. And we disagree with that characterization. Dollar value of the consequences is the wrong way to look at things. And what the committee ought to look at, in contrast, is the series of offenses as a whole and the impact to the principles and regime that the legislature has set forward. And secondly, inadvertence, that's not a defense under the Municipal Elections Act, but there's something more important the committee needs to keep in mind when it's making its decision. And that's the general deterrence factor here, which cannot be overlooked. Again, Mr. Thompson has significant experience with elections, with municipal elections particularly, and significant experience with the campaign finance regime, which makes the mistakes identified in the auditor's report inexcusable. Ultimately, letting a seasoned politician with a 40-year career off the hook for these violations of the most basic rules would show future candidates, and indeed the public, that it's okay to be sloppy when preparing your financial statement. And that cannot be the case. And for that reason, and for the other reasons I've mentioned, members of the committee and Mr. Chair, it's my submission that a prosecution is in the public interest in this case. Subject to any questions that the committee may have, those are my submissions on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pappas. Do members have any questions for Mr. Pappas? Okay, hearing none. The following designated person is here on behalf of the candidate Doug Thompson, Stéphane Aymar-Chabot from Sicotte-Guilbeault.
He's coming online now, Chair.
Good afternoon, Mr. Aymar-Chabot.
Good afternoon, Chair Cullen.
All right, we are ready to proceed with your 10 minutes of submissions, Mr. Aymar-Chabot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee. Good afternoon. As you've been told, I appear here on behalf of Mr. Thompson, the candidate who sends his regrets. Mr. Thompson is abroad at the moment and does not, unfortunately, enjoy internet connection, allowing him to join. And I received an email from him about an hour ago saying he had no phone service either. Or would be losing phone service as he was traveling. So that's the information I have, but certainly his regrets for not attending. It's important to remember why we're here today. There was a complaint filed by Mr. Pappas's client, Mr. Phillips, with respect to two alleged infractions of the Municipal Elections Act. One pertaining to the reused election signs, which Mr. Thompson freely admitted to at the initial hearing when the decision was made to proceed with the compliance audit. And the second complaint was with respect to the use of decals or magnetic signs on vehicles, though that part of the complaint was dismissed because it was not founded. Those pieces of campaign materials were in fact newly acquired and accounted for in the Form 4, and that was also discussed at the initial hearing. So we are here because of this first piece of the complaint regarding to the reused signs, an error that Mr. Thompson explained to this committee and to the auditors, something which has not been challenged, which was he put a round number of $100 to acknowledge that he was reusing signs and intended to replace that number with the actual amount once the elections were over and he knew exactly how many signs of which size, of which type he had reused. Unfortunately, that was not done. The exact number was not substituted in Form 4 for the placeholder number of $100. And that was an error, clearly. And it was, as I said, admitted to very openly, very freely by Mr. Thompson when the matter was first heard. The final number is exactly what Mr. Thompson had wanted to submit to this committee, which was a discrepancy of $144. The final number provided by the printer and verified by the auditor. So on that point, Mr. Thompson's position certainly has not changed. He made a mistake, admitted it from day one, which led to then the next step of the compliance audit. What did the compliance audit reveal? Well, yes, Mr. Pappas indicated that I would refer to the size of the mistakes, and they are relevant. So What I'll submit to you very briefly is that there is nothing to be gained, and it is not in the public interest to engage or to continue the process and commence legal proceedings against Mr. Thompson because of the types of errors committed, the nature of what these errors went to, the size of the errors, and the number of errors that were committed. More importantly, the sum of all of these errors, I will submit to you, in no way could lead a reasonable person to conclude that they had an impact on the integrity of the election or of the election campaign or its outcome. You have seen the report, but I simply want to go through, again, key pieces. First of all, the nature of the errors. The errors are, yes, reporting errors, but they do not extend to errors that I would call structural errors. There was no fundraising prior to registration. There was no campaign expenses prior to registration. Essentially, everything that took place in Mr. Thompson's campaign took place as it should within the election period. Mr. Thompson did not seek to shrug his obligation to file, and certainly did not, and we'll speak to intent, but did not intend to misrepresent, knowing full well that he had the obligation to file what he felt were accurate filings with the city. So the types of errors are not structural. They are all within the campaign, arithmetic errors or reporting errors. And these are minor errors. And yes, this is a relevant factor as well. The amount that was overreported, I believe, of home hardware receipts is $6 or just shy of that. The amount of bank charges that were overreported are in the $40 range. There's a missing receipt for $22. A missing receipt, a single missing receipt in a campaign that is run by volunteers over several months. I would put to you, if we were to do compliance audits of all the campaigns, we would likely find a couple of missing receipts everywhere. These do not amount, the size of the errors, the types of errors do not amount to something that calls into question the integrity or the confidence in the filings or in this election campaign. The more sizable number that was picked up by the auditors is the reporting of Mr. Thompson's spouse and her campaign contribution. To be clear, the full amount of $1,000 was declared. It was declared with all the other contributions of $100 or more as per the Act. Unfortunately, Mr. Thompson should have reported that under contributions from the candidate and the spouse and put it in the wrong column. But again, transparency was there, accountability was there, the amount was fully shown, who made the contribution was fully shown. There was, again, nothing there to try to hide or shirk the responsibilities of the candidate. We are far from Form 4s that contain dozens of errors, holes that are completely inexplicable, donations that are not accounted for, spending that took place prior to or fundraising that took place prior to a candidate registering. These are, I would submit, and if you look at the total value of these errors, represent less than 1% of what Mr. Thompson actually spent. The campaign spent just roughly shy of, or just slightly above the 75% mark of what was authorized under law. So again, regardless of how you look at these numbers, we were miles from reaching or going over the spending limit. So if you look at the basic principles that the courts have told us why the Act is here, ensuring the integrity, ensuring a level playing field, none of those principles we submit are breached by the small errors that are found. And to speak to the notion of general deterrence, it's important to remember that someone like Mr. Thompson, who for the last 14 months has been sort of under this cloud of the audit, the process itself has clear consequences. It makes the candidate very Mr. Thompson on those mistakes. But proceeding further to commencing legal proceedings with the resources required of the public, required of the judicial system, required of Mr. Thompson, given the nature, the type, the size of errors, we submit would not be in the public interest.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. General deterrence is a factor for imposing a penalty. In this context, the concern I would have is that we're not holding people to account. We're asking for people to be perfect if we go on to initiating legal proceedings against someone like Mr. Thompson. Perfection is not of this world, and there is nothing here to call into question the integrity. What this would do is, in fact, throw a cold shower on anyone who is considering seeking public office at the municipal level, that they will not only be held to public account, to transparency, but even when their errors do not amount to questioning or calling into question the integrity of the process, they could face extreme consequences that, for themselves at least, are very costly and very personally difficult to go through.
Time.
Thank you. Chair Cullen, you're muted at the moment.
Apologies. Thank you, Mr. Marchabot. Do members have any questions for Mr. Marchabot? Mr. Eldar, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just, I'm not even sure if you can answer this question yourself, or this is more for the candidate. Just thinking about the concept of putting a placeholder in the financial statement, which is something you complete at the end after you've done pretty much, you've gathered all your receipts. It seems a little bit unusual of a practice. Maybe you can, would you have any more additional information about that?
I can certainly comment on why Mr. Thompson did it. This is so valuing reused materials and reused signs are the most common, I would submit. Is not like going to a store and spending something, or going to a webmaster and asking for a website to be produced. This is not something where you have an invoice and you pay it and you put it into your accounting software. The value of the election signs will depend at the end of the day how many you actually used. And those decisions will be taking place all the way through the campaign. And you may decide a week before election day, oh, well, I've got these 4 big signs that are left. Let's put them up at these corners and use them. So just from a very practical point of view, determining how many signs were used and then finding out what their value is in today's dollars is not something that, you know, just in the day-to-day of a campaign, you would know until the campaign is done. And then you would have to account and say, okay, we actually reused whatever number, get a evaluation from your printer. And that is what Mr. Thompson failed to do prior to filing. But as he has indicated to this committee and to the auditors, and on this, he's always been consistent, the amount there was to remind him that he had reused, he had to declare. Unfortunately, he did not indicate the real amount, which was in fact $145 more than the 100 he put. So it's a unique kind of expense because you don't know until the end how much you actually reuse, and if it's going to be accurate, it's got to be until election day.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Marchabot? All right, seeing none, submissions from designated persons have now closed. Do members have any questions for city staff or Raymond Shabbat Grant Thornton or committee council? Member Bassett, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question if Raymond Chabot could confirm the fair market value of the signs.
So from that perspective, again, we are acknowledging that there is an apparent non-compliance, but with regards to, not being able to do our own inventory count since, we weren't there when people were doing the inventory count, so it's difficult for us to verify the inventory. And then also it's difficult to, determine the fair market value for a leftover sign from, Doug Thompson. We noted it as an apparent non-compliance, but again, we weren't in a position to report an amount. Again, we did verify with Holly Signs what they had, indicated with regards to an inventory and a value, but we weren't in a position to provide that amount.
Member Eldar?
Just to follow up on that particular question towards the statement that Mr. Thompson has made, that you have confirmed that the $146 to be an accurate figure for the understatement. Are you in support of that statement or are you not?
Is that directed at Raymond Shabbat?
Yes, please.
Again, like I had just explained, verifying that inventory count that was provided by Mr. Thompson, that was provided by Holly Signs, it's a difficult process to, since we weren't there, we didn't, do an inventory count with them. So to verify that ourselves and to provide that as something that we opine to, then no, we couldn't do that. So then without having that, it's difficult for us to verify that, that's the amount based on what was provided by that valuation.
Thank you.
If I can just follow up with a clarification on that. So I understand the number of signs may not be possible to verify, but the actual amount of value for a individual reused sign, is that not something that you could have assessed independently yourselves?
Yes, and we had discussed that with the Holly Signs, and again, they provided their values based on the signs provided, and the price for similar signs with regards to buying a new sign, and based on that, we did feel it was reasonable for an amount. But again, the difficulty is, we cannot again put a number of signs, so then we cannot again put a value as a total inside of our report.
Are there any other questions from members of the committee for Raymond Shabbat Grant Thornton or city staff or committee council? Seeing none, do any members wish to make any comments on this matter in open meeting? Okay, seeing none, the committee will adjourn and deliberate in private on this matter pursuant to subsection 88.33 sub 5.1 of the Municipal Elections Act, and we will reconvene to convey our decision when it is ready. Thank you. Eric, we're just waiting another moment here. The Zoom link that you sent around just needed to be updated for a couple of people, I think. Okay, I believe we've all reconvened, Mr. Pillow. Are we live again, or can we go live again, please?
Yes, Chair, you're live.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your patience. The committee has now reconvened, and I will move the decision of the committee. In the matter of candidate Mr. Douglas Thompson, be it resolved that the committee issues the following decision and reasons. Upon receiving report ACS 2024-OCC-GEN-0013 titled Election Compliance Audit of the Campaign Finances of Candidate Doug Thompson of Ward 20 Osgood from the 2022 municipal elections, and upon hearing the representations and/or reading the written submissions and documents submitted by the auditor, the candidate, the applicant, their representatives, and city staff, this committee hereby decides not to commence legal proceedings against candidate Doug Thompson for apparent contraventions of the election campaign finance provisions under the Municipal Elections Act 1996. With respect to the parties' positions, the applicant by his counsel, Mr. John Pappas of Airden Burles LLP, who addressed the committee on behalf of Mr. Phillips, submitted that legal proceedings should be pursued to serve the public interest or integrity and accountability underpinning the MEA's campaign finance regime. In that respect, Mr. Pappas highlighted that the report revealed a series of errors, including inaccuracies, misclassification of transactions, and inadequate record keeping. These issues, though seemingly minor, point to Mr. Thompson's failure to uphold his duty for accurate reporting. Mr. Pappas placed a particular emphasis on the importance of the Election Compliance Audit Committee's role in ensuring the integrity of elections by scrutinizing campaign finance statements and valuing contributions. He submitted that proper record keeping is crucial for maintaining transparency and providing adequate backup when reporting to the public. The central purpose of these obligations is to foster confidence among electors in the electoral process. Mr. Pappas submitted that despite Mr. Thompson's approximate 40 years of experience in municipal politics, he demonstrated a lack of the sort of care and meticulousness expected from someone of his standing. Any suggestions that these errors were merely inadvertent is belied by Mr. Thompson's lengthy experience. Finally, Mr. Pappas submitted that the committee must consider the need for general deterrence. Allowing Mr. Thompson to evade accountability after his long career would undermine public trust and set a dangerous precedent. The committee received written submissions from Mr. Thompson's counsel, Mr. Stéphane Emile Chabot, dated September 9, 2024, as well as oral submissions. Mr. Thompson submitted that the committee should not commence legal proceedings. Mr. Thompson raised a preliminary concern over the fairness of the committee's decision to deny his adjournment request in his written submissions. Mr. Emile Chabot did not raise this point in oral submissions. With respect to reused signs, Mr. Thompson admitted to an error in the reported value of reused campaign signs. Initially, a placeholder value of $100 was used, which was intended to be updated with the actual cost once determined. The actual cost, confirmed as $244.60, was independently verified by the auditor. By placing a temporary figure, Mr. Thompson states that he clearly indicated his awareness of the obligation to declare the value of the reused signs. Mr. Thompson claims this error was in good faith and was a simple oversight rather than a deliberate attempt to misrepresent campaign finances. With respect to the contribution by Mr. Thompson's spouse, the audit found that a donation from Mr. Thompson's spouse was recorded but misclassified. Although the full amount was reported correctly, it was not listed under the appropriate category of candidate and spouse. Mr. Thompson maintains this mistake was clerical in nature and not indicative of any intent to evade donation limits. With respect to calculation errors, 2 calculation errors were identified. Bank charges were overstated by $34.05, and miscellaneous purchases were understated by $5.91. Mr. Thompson claimed that these discrepancies are relatively small and do not suggest any deliberate attempt to misrepresent expenses. The nature of these errors, one overestimating and one underestimating, further supported the argument that they were unintentional. And finally, a missing receipt. A single receipt for $21.95 was missing from Mr. Thompson's records. While this is a compliance issue, Mr. Thompson claimed that it is not unexpected in a volunteer-run campaign. The absence of this receipt does not substantially impact the overall integrity of the financial reporting. With respect to the public interest factor, in particular the need for accountability and general deterrence, Mr. Aymar-Chabot pointed out that this process has put Mr. Thompson under intense public scrutiny. He stated that the audit itself, coupled with the procedures leading up to it, have served the public interest sufficiently. He further noted that the committee would be sending the wrong message to those who might participate in municipal politics if they fear prosecution for even the slightest errors that do not impact on the integrity of the election process. In conclusion, Mr. Thompson acknowledged the errors and the importance of accurate reporting. However, Mr. Thompson claims the errors identified are minor compared to the overall campaign budget of $18,701.13, which he submits represent just 1.1% of the total expenditure. Mr. Thompson claims these errors do not significantly affect the integrity of the campaign's financial statements because he was never close to exceeding the statutory spending limit. Regarding the nature of the mistakes, these errors, individually or as an aggregate, do not pass the quantitative or qualitative thresholds of materiality, because the errors would not objectively lead someone to question the overall validity or reliability of Mr. Thompson's filings. The errors, while acknowledged, are not of a magnitude that would justify further legal proceedings. Mr. Thompson submits that his campaign finances have been thoroughly vetted through Mr. Thompson's own auditor, scrutiny by the public, and the extensive work leading to the compliance report. Mr. Thompson submitted that commencing legal action would serve no purpose and respectfully request that the committee not proceed further with this complaint. The committee has considered all of the evidence and the parties' submissions. Although the evidence shows Mr. Thompson's campaign finance reporting was clearly and admittedly inaccurate, we do not believe commencing legal proceedings is appropriate in these circumstances. Given this conclusion, there is no need to address his procedural fairness argument. With respect to the nature and gravity of the apparent violations, be they financial or merely clerical, they all fall within the de minimis threshold. As Monsieur Aymar-Chabot rightly pointed out, the evidence suggests that Mr. Thompson's reporting errors amount to approximately 1% of his total campaign expenses. Further, on no reading of the evidence before the committee, would it be possible to conclude that Mr. Thompson actually or apparently exceeded the spending limit imposed under the Municipal Elections Act? These violations are not of the sort that call into question whether the candidate's inaccurate reporting might have had any real and tangible effect on the election itself. This is distinguishable from, for example, instances in which a candidate gains an unfair advantage by exceeding a spending limit, which casts doubt on whether the election's outcome might well have been different absent the violation. We pause to note that the auditor, Raymond Chabot Grant Thornton, did not assess the fair market value of the reused signs. We recognize that factors might have prevented the auditor from assessing the reused signs' fair market value down to the penny. However, in our view, the auditor should have attempted to provide its opinion on fair market value, at least on the material value of a single sign, so that the committee could consider that figure together with the other evidence on the record, for example, evidence of the number of signs used. As it did not, we are left with Mr. Thompson's evidence of the sign value, which he obtained from his provider, Hawley Signs, We accept that evidence. With respect to safeguarding the public interest in assuring accountability and transparency has been served. Mr. Thompson has been in municipal politics for 40 years. He made mistakes in his Form 4 financial statement. Those mistakes have been scrutinized by the public, the auditor, and this committee. Again, had Mr. Thompson's violations been of a sort that could, in the eyes of a reasonable member of the public, impact the integrity of the election process, our decision might have been different. This is not the case. The committee has carefully considered the nature of the apparent contraventions at issue against the cost to both the public and Mr. Thompson associated with legal proceedings. In the result, the committee is driven to the conclusion that weighing these factors, the public interest is best served by not commencing legal proceedings in these circumstances. Having read the motion, I'll ask now if it is carried.
Carried.
And are there any dissents?
No.
Hearing none, the motion is carried. Moving to item number 5 on the committee's agenda for today, are there any inquiries? Seeing none, moving to item 6, is there any other business for the committee today? Seeing none, we will move to item 7, adjournment. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your participation.